journey to becoming writers.
Yes.
I don't know about you, and you're going to have to tell me, but I like to read when I was a child.
Yes.
What was your experience like, and what were some of your first books that you liked, or the kind of books you liked?
Well, one of the first things, first of all, I moved around every 2 to 3 years because my father was in the Navy. And so it was mostly up and down the Eastern Seaboard, but also some stints out in California, the Los Angeles area. And we really, I was an introvert. So it's very hard for me to walk into a new situation. So sometimes I would flee to the library. And we lived in Mystic, Connecticut, which is a historical town. If some of you may know it, it's actually a old whaling village, the Mystic Seaport area. And we have a library there that's a historical library. And I would go into the back room and I would just read for hours, and mostly historical fiction. And that's really, and the history of that area, which was a very big in the 1800s, really, and we lived in an old Civil War colonel's house. So it was an 1800s house. So that kind of, and all the pokiness that comes with it. So I really enjoyed learning about history, and that kind of swept me away. When I had those moments of anxiety, my father used to always say, if you have a book, you have a friend. That's his philosophy on life, and you should see his library. But it definitely was true in some moments for me. Yeah, and for you, I mean,
I felt the same. I think that there were many times that I escaped in a similar way and got very much wrapped up in a book and didn't hear anything that was going on around me.
Yes.
So I would miss the first dinner call, and I like to eat dinner. So, but that was pretty typical for me.
Yeah.
No question. I definitely enjoyed that. And do you think that what you studied in school along the way, both before college, university, affected what you wrote about or your style of writing in any way?
I think that I loved reading literature. I loved analyzing literature. But when it came to picking a major in college, I didn't want to be a journalist. I didn't think I'd make a good novelist. And I didn't want to teach. So my dad's like, how about economics? That's kind of, a lot of writing, a lot of, theory. You might enjoy that. And I actually did enjoy it. And so that really played into my interest. I actually ended up having a banking career for 10 years before I started writing. And so big change. Yeah. But it really played into my interest regarding the winemaking business and how that worked both in France and here. And so that's really what I started studying and learning about before I even had the kind of concept of the novel. Right. And yeah, and right. so your background is it in many things.
So I really studied science undergraduate. I was a dual major in biology and psychology. And I thought at first I was going to be an agronomist and move to Israel. That was my plan. And then I took my first class in botany. This is probably heresy to some of you in the audience. But once I learned what made up a plant structurally, about phloem and xylem and the nutrients and the water, somehow it disturbed the art of it in my mind. So I shied away from that. I was still a biology major, a little bit pre-med, and wound up pursuing the healthcare industry and administration.
Yeah.
I did enjoy science. I still enjoyed science, but at the same time, in my free time, I was always into the dramatic arts. So I was acting, I was singing, a little bit of dancing. Anytime I had free time after organic chemistry, I was doing a play. It was a strange combination, but I think that I have brought both of those interests to my writing, and in fact, in my novel.
And I will say, I finished reading The Convention of Wives, which I love, and it's a beautiful historical, both present day and historical novel. And you weave in so many aspects of your experience. And one of the things that we were talking about before when we were getting ready to do this is the fact that she knows everything about plants. She has a green thumb. She has her own garden. I can't keep anything green alive.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons I write about winemaking and grape growing, because I cannot for the life of me. I admire all of you so much. I've never had that talent. So I try to put to the page really what I like to learn about. So that's also sparked my interest.
And that's why I love coming here. When I come out here, I pretend I'm involved with this
Yeah.
industry, and I stare at the fields, and I'm very, very comfortable with the symmetry of the vineyards.
I pretended so
Fabulous.
much, I coughed up 3 novels out
There
of
you
it.
go. That's a lot
So,
of pretend.
and I get goosebumps when I turn down Cuttings Wharf Road, and this right here, Bouchaine, is actually the inspiration and the setting for my fictional Eagles Run vineyard in my novels. So it's all set in Carneros. So yeah, I mean, these actual vineyards. So it's really exciting to be back.
So maybe we can take off on that. You mentioned what you did in school, but what was your journey toward writing? Was there a moment? Was there a time in your life that lent itself? I know you have 3 children.
I do.
Yes. I have 3
Yes.
children. So there was a time for work. There was a time for mothering.
There's a lot of time in between the
Yes.
writing, that's for sure. I would say I had a banking career for 10 years, and I was pregnant with my first daughter, and now I'm really dating myself, in 2000 when we took a trip to the Loire Valley and drank the Vouvray wines. And I had 1 glass the whole trip because I was pregnant, but we really enjoyed our time there. But I had lived in the Napa. I had lived in San Francisco and visited Napa and toured Napa and loved the wineries here. So I was so fascinated by the comparisons, and they're very, very different. And the soil and the terroir is very different. So that was really exciting. And I actually had the inspiration for the novel, the first one, standing in a vineyard in the Loire Valley in Vouvray. I was absolutely blown away by the breathtaking scene before me. And I just had one of those goosebump moments where I said, this would be the most beautiful setting for the novel that I've always wanted to write, but don't know what it's going to be about. So that's really how that happened. That was my moment. And then I ended up coming back, staying at home with the kids, because I wanted to try that on, because I wasn't thrilled with my banking career, although I had learned a lot. And then I really started writing to escape the laundry. Is really what it was. That's no joke. It's actually what happened. I can't possibly do that. I'm writing.
now.
Exactly.
Nice.
And for you, did you have a moment where you knew you wanted to write this?
So I came to the writing via a strange journey. I was in healthcare. I was an administrator, in particular in ambulatory care.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed one job in particular, and that was an emergency room administrator. And I think I enjoyed the drama.
It's intense.
The drama of it.
There's a lot of stories there,
There are a lot of stories. In fact, I thought a show called ER would have been a great idea. And somehow it happened without me. I don't know how that happened. But I was home with kids for about 13 or 14 years. Yeah. And then went back to healthcare and started writing grants for hospitals, trying to get funding for programs and for equipment. And it was at that time when I was writing those grants that unfortunately my mom got a bit ill. I had to step back a little bit. She's still with us.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Good.
But I did take a step back, and I decided while I was attending to her, I would take myself to a writing class. I had started this novel, and I'll tell you how in a second, but I had never written a novel. You know, I'd written grants, I'd written a little bit of fiction on the side, but a novel is a very different thing. So I signed up for a class, and that was really the beginning of attending to the novel seriously. The beginnings of the novel happened when I, as a doctor's wife, attended one of the many medical conferences that I had over the years. This was actually in San Diego.
Oh,
and I looked out at a sea of, they were women, mostly women like me at the time. Of course, now you can't say that. They're spouses, you know, there are plenty of
partners,
women in medicine, partners, right. So I looked out at all these women with their novels by the pool, just like me, relaxing a little bit, taking some time away from children mostly. And I wondered who they were. I wondered what their lives were. Did they work? Did they stay home with kids? Had they found the magic balance?
Has anyone?
I had not found this. I hadn't found that magic balance, but maybe they had. And I really wish that I could have shared with them a little bit. But instead, I outlined a book,
Wow,
about 13 plot points.
that's ambitious.
And the book, in large part, follows that plot points.
That's
but-
impressive.
But that was the moment. I just wondered if they were going through what I was going through and what their lives were like.
Right.
And of course, that was really the contemporary story, and the historic really grew out of the character development and the backstories of the characters.
That's cool. Yeah.
So you've described a little bit about how Napa in particular figures in for you. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Or?
Well, I was so inspired when I lived here, again, dating myself in the 90s, and lived in San Francisco. And I would come over here with my then boyfriend, now husband of 25 years, and we would tour the wineries and come. That's great fun, just great fun. But I still consider myself, after all these years, a wine enthusiast. I'm certainly not an expert. And I am constantly learning. And so one of the things that struck me really about touring this area and really inspired me to write about Napa, and Carneros in particular, because it's half Sonoma and half Napa, is the fact that, you know, over so many years, and I write about really the first golden age of winemaking, which was in not the 1970s, but in fact, the mid to late 1800s. And so that's where my story starts in 1895. And so I really, really wanted to talk about the unique blend of science and art that goes into winemaking, because I find it fascinating. And, you know, you have so many years of, you know, pestilence and floods and, you know, frost and all these things. And I could go on and on and on, but you all know that you have to combat. And yet the winemakers and the grapes persist.
It's almost magic.
It's
It even
almost
happens,
magic.
right,
And
right.
so to dive into that world was so satisfying for me, because I was learning so much. And then to also dive into the history of that era, like the great earthquake and fire of San Francisco plays into the second novel. The Chinese immigrants are a huge part of the first novel. And then World War I is the third novel. So to kind of weave that all together just was too enticing to resist, I would say.
And I think in a similar way, the history that
Yes.
is attached to the characters in my novel as well just enriches the whole story.
Well, and you weave in a lovely, and I do too. This is one of the things we have in common. We have strong women.
Yes.
And we have kind of this journey of, you know, whatever it is they're trying to achieve, but it's also a journey of faith and questioning that faith and friendship. And it's really interesting to be able to explore that.
I think that's true. I have two characters in my novel, one Catholic, one Jewish.
Yeah.
And as you alluded to, there are some moments in their friendship that are a bit of a trial.
Yep.
And one of the overriding themes in the novel, my novel, without giving it away, is what it really means in the end to be family and to be friends because of your faith, despite your faith at times,
Right.
and all of that. So
Right.
we do have that in common in our books, no question.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how too the faith that some characters choose to keep and some move past and adapt other ways of walking through the world. It's interesting to see how those play out.
Very much of today and what is going on.
Right. And we say that because oftentimes you're inspired to write something and you don't necessarily know where it's coming from. You know, it's like when you get that creative inspiration, a character might come through to you and say, well, this is how this is going to go. And you're like, I did not know that. And it's your, they're writing the book.
Yes.
And if you're really in tune with your characters, they will do things like that. And you feel like a mad person. But in fact, that is how the process does work when it's working well.
Yes,
I think.
and you are often taken in directions you
Yes.
have no idea.
That's right.
No question.
That's right.
In fact, we'll talk about it later, but
Yeah.
I have a second novel, and a character that was absolutely a supporting character wound up being the main character. I don't know.
You didn't necessarily plan that, did you?
Not at all.
No.
Not at
Yeah.
all. She wrote herself in
Right.
more and more and more. So that
Yep.
kind of can happen. And you talked about Napa, and I will tell you, Napa is not in my novel, at least not in this first novel. Maybe in the third. I'm working on something right now, but I did do a lot of writing at the Black Bear Diner.
It's your inspiration.
Right in Napa. I don't.
Right.
I,
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
But there's something
Now, what do you eat when you're at the Black Bear Diner or drink?
Mostly they bring me decaf coffee for hours on end.
I
and
was
they
going to
leave-
say,
they let
how do
me
you
sit-
keep your booth or
they're
your
ve-
chair?
They're very generous with, you know,
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't say, but I sit there for a while and I think I look up and everyone around me has changed. It's like, you know, a really interesting experience. And sometimes I overhear conversation that I am sure gets into the novel. You know, I hear some.
Even just the cadence can help you with a dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so we talked a little bit about why we wrote these stories, but I'm wondering, is your story in any way autobiographical?
I will say there are definitely, you know, what's really fun about being an author is that you kind of get to play God, and you can take the people that you love and the people that you don't love, and you can take different parts of their characters and put them into your characters. And so all my characters are composite characters. Some are of people that I know. Others are not. Others are pure invention. But I will say that I was always interested in winemaking because I love drinking wine and I couldn't grow anything. And I also was really interested in the immigrant story because I come from French and Irish immigrants. They were not winemakers, sadly, but they were farmers in the St. Lawrence River Valley. The French were up in Canada and they came down right before the Civil War to Massachusetts, actually. So it's always been interesting for me to learn about, you know, and they all came penniless and had to work their way up. And so that journey always resonated with me, and I wanted to write about it, learn more about it, because, you know, they didn't have the modern comforts that we had when they came over. So it was really interesting for me to, and I did a lot of my research at the Napa County Historical Society, which is why it's so important that you all are here. Thank you for being a part of it, because you know what, when I just came here with a little dream and my pen and my laptop, the Napa County Historical Society and the librarians in particular were so amazing, showed me all the old photographs of the different immigrants who had come. And it was, and a picture does speak 1,000 words. And it really just brought it to life for me. And so thank you. Yeah. That was a long answer to your short question.
Right. No, I'm sure it was very inspirational. And I think as you said, every author brings the people in their life to their book.
Yeah.
And I did the same, and mostly composites, but I actually have one character that I wrote, and it was only when the book went to print that I realized that this woman who exists, named Sylvia,
Right.
who had given me an amazing historical tour of the island of Barbados, I had not changed her name in the book. And I just forgot to do that. So I had to bring her a copy and give her fair warning that it was her, but not really.
She's quite a character too. I love her character.
But
Yeah.
it's a parody of this woman, but I really had to give her warning. And she had a great sense of humor about it and really enjoyed the read. And I think feels a little bit like a celebrity at her age, you know, being in the book. So it all worked out in the end.
But you say she gave you the tour of Barbados, and that's one of the things I love about Deb's book is it does take you to all these great locales, and so you're not and you go back and forth in time. So it's pretty cool the way you did that.
But I also think yours, you know, you can picture the family in France, you can picture the journey,
right,
and the difficulty of the journey, and also the journey from the Northeast all the way across, you know, the country to here. And
that's what's so important. That's why librarians are so important. The librarians in Connecticut, where I was living at the time, the librarians at the Napa County Historical Society, I needed to know, like, what train would one take in the dead of winter to get from New York to California? You know, I mean, like these kind of things, you just can't. I mean, I'm very particular. Everything has to be accurate in my novels. And so that's why these people are so incredibly important.
And I have to tell you, I have to take better advantage of the librarians because I've done a lot online. There is a lot online.
There are.
Available.
Yeah.
But do you think it's a little bit different going to the library?
I do, because they can find very obscure pieces of material, and they ordered me books from around the country in different university libraries that I never could have found otherwise. There are a lot of archives online. Like I used the Napa Wine and Spirit Review from the 1800s to really inform a lot of what was going on in the wine trade at that time in my novel. So that was helpful. But really, librarians are our best
I'm
friends.
gonna take a lesson from my
Our
third
best
novel,
friend.
which is a little bit in this area. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna call you after.
All right, great.
Absolutely.
We'll chat.
And was there any particular historical moment? You mentioned a few things, but anything in particular that resounded with you or affected the writing? You mentioned the earthquake.
Yeah, the earthquake and fire in San Francisco. I really went into detail on that in the second book, and my characters experienced that both in Napa and in San Francisco at the time. And so you get the view from both. And I think that that was really amazing to write. And to do that, I went back, looked at old newspaper articles, eyewitness accounts, and photos, because photos were really important to see the plume of smoke that was rising. And then I would say the third book that I just came out with, The Vintner's Legacy, takes us through World War I. So it's when the Americans entered the war in 1917, over in France on the battlefields, but also here. And they know at that point that a prohibition is coming. And so they're gearing up for that. So it kind of takes them to, so a lot, I read all those historical events play in, along with like the women's rights movement was a big deal in that time period. So I covered a lot with that because I have a very strong female and male characters. You have to be strong as a winemaker. So you got to be resilient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like the vines.
Exactly.
No
Exactly.
And I also was very affected by the artwork that I saw online at the times that I was looking into. Initially, I think I was telling somebody in the audience that I was writing about the 1600s in Europe.
Yes.
And the pogroms that had happened at that time. There was something called the Kamenetsky Rebellion. And I was told by a developmental editor to kick it up to the 1800s. But there were pogroms in Europe, killings of Jews in Europe, sadly, pretty much in every decade. So I was able to do that. But there was art depicting those pogroms, and that was very moving for me. And to the houses on fire and scenes that were just horrific. But it really brought out the emotion, I think, in my writing to really visually see those depictions.
Yes.
So that, I think that was very significant for me.
Yeah, it's an important part of the process, I think. Yeah.
I think so. All right. Well, let's discuss some of the shared themes that we have. We mentioned strong women and changing roles. And I'm going to kick it off and maybe you'll take it. So the Convention of Wives, the title itself is double entendre, because these two women, as I mentioned, meet at a medical conference. But it also, in a larger sense, is about the changing roles of wives, of women, and the not so much changing roles of women, how we are the glue, and at times we are behind the scenes. Yes. And perhaps over the decades, over the eons, that hasn't changed. It has changed in certain ways, but that is certainly one of the themes of my book. And I think you have a similar theme in yours. Yes,
and one of the tricky things about that time in Napa history was that the women's rights movement was kicking off across the country. Women were starting to get the vote. And here, if you were a female winemaker, and there were several upon whom I kind of based my female protagonist, if you were a female and you were for women's rights, well, the majority of women's rights advocates were also with the temperance movement, and they wanted a prohibition on alcohol. So you kind of have a little bit of a catch-22 there.
If you're, it was.
So my characters go through, my married characters go through this thing where it's like a push and pull. She's like, well, I need to go out and march for better wages and factory conditions and all these things for women. And he's like, wait a minute, you're marching against the family business. You can't do that. So it's like one of these little juxtapositions, which is so fascinating from a historical perspective, and how they work through that is one of the many things. And so that's kind of how I can't give it away, but yeah,
it is a very interesting moment.
It's fun.
No
yeah, it's fun. So Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk a little bit about our processes and our style of writing?
Yeah.
First of all, I don't know if the audience knows the difference between a plotter and a pantser. Anybody? No? No. Okay.
We
So-
didn't either before we started writing.
Absolutely. Strange word. So a plotter, as I mentioned, I sat at the pool and I wrote out 13 plot
Right.
points. So that's a plotter, somebody who plans their novel ahead, even though the characters eventually can take them in other directions.
Yeah.
But somebody who at least has a plan. And then a pantser is somebody who flies by the seat of their pants. So
Pantser.
writers are usually one or the other. And
Right.
so I am somewhat of a plotter, obviously, but not always. What about you?
I have every good intention of plotting the whole thing out. I get about halfway every time and I can't take it anymore. I have to go write a scene. So then what happens, my second novel, so the first one I had all the time in the world. It took me like 13 years to write it, all the time in the world. Second one, I was under contract and had to write it in 18 months, like really write it and like have it, deliver it to my editor.
I don't know how you do that. But
Well,
okay,
I got
okay.
through half of it, The California Wife. I got through half of it and then it just sank in the middle. And I'm like, oh, I don't have the rest of the plot. And so one of the things I
I
learned,
have to
yeah,
interrupt
go
you for a
ahead.
second. There's another term called the murky middle.
The murky
The
middle.
murky middle.
And
where
the-
writers get stuck.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about it, but now, yes,
you know.
I know. And so the best way to get your characters out of the murky middle is to plunge them into more drama and more difficulty. So go find that big historical event, go find whatever it is you need to put them into more trouble and see them climb out of it. And that is what perpetuates your plot. And in this case, it was also introducing a new character to kind of stir things up. It was a character who had been in the first novel. She was a midwife, and she kept back of my head saying, me over here, I got a whole storyline, honey. You need to put me in there. And you know what, sure enough, she delivered. She delivered. When I let her in, she had the whole thing and it was great. And she actually was, this character was one of the first female surgical candidates at Cooper Medical College in San Francisco. And so that was a whole other thing. So I had the winemaking and then the medical
Don't
stuff
give
and
too
all.
much away.
I won't.
It's fascinating.
I can't give it away.
It's
I couldn't
fascinating.
possibly.
No, it's
But
fascinating.
yeah, so that's how, yeah, so that's, I'm kind of a little bit of both.
Plotter than pantser.
I'm more of a pantser.
Okay. And what is your process like? Do you write all the time? Do you write a certain time of day? Where are you when you're writing?
I usually get the kids off to school. Now there's only one left to get to school. Get her to school. Yay, getting there.
Okay.
And then a 13-year-old, get her off to school. And then I write from like 9 to 1, little tea, little snack. And then usually I prepare what I'm going to write about the night before, make sure I have all the research there in front of me so I can sit down and just write the scene. And then I'll edit it that evening or the next morning. And that's generally how I write. But I can't do more than 3 or 4 hours. I just can't do it. I get too, and the laundry calls. No, I get too tired. I just get, the laundry's
room is right near my desk. So
that's not good.
No, it's probably not a good one. And I am not as disciplined. So I don't have a specific time of day, although I do find morning for me, early morning.
Yes.
In fact, when our oldest was getting married and I was not sleeping for about a year, planning that wedding, I was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
my
and my
goodness.
best writing was done from about 3 till just when the sun was coming up. And then I would fall asleep.
Yeah, when the kids were little, I used to get up at 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's something about that hour. I think it also lends itself to you being more creative. There's something physiologically that it does. You have to look into that.
I just cry out for God to inspire me in some way because I have nothing at 4 o'clock in the morning
Oh,
to put
okay.
to
I
the
don't
paper.
I get a little.
It takes me a little while.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
All right.
great.
Well, you can call me if you're.
I will.
Okay. And so you mentioned
Yeah,
the
East Coast.
historical research that you did, and what do you think drives your writing more, the plot or the characters? We talked about characters taking you on a ride, but what do you think? You think you're the plot or the character?
I think it's a healthy combination of the two. And I think that some characters just pop into your head and they really want to be heard. But I will say that most often the historical events that actually occurred are the scaffolding for my plot and the whole novel. And then it's really who's going to go through what. and who am I going to put it and how am I going to weave it, which is the real challenge and fun in the process. It can be very frustrating too, but it's fun. How about you? Like you're thinking
I think
a little bit of both?
I think I would agree with you that I do enjoy bringing the historical events into the story, and they have become more significant as my writing has gone on. But I think I would have to say a little bit more the characters. And in fact, in this book, one of my characters, I had written a few chapters about his family's historical background. And the novel was too long and something had to be cut. So I was told to take out his history. And I did that. And then I found that his contemporary character was flatter than all the other characters.
It's a hard choice.
You didn't understand his motivations, where he had come from. And so I'm not 100% comfortable with that. And I was meeting with a book club a couple of weeks ago, and I'm usually meeting with mostly women. It's women's fiction novel and historical fiction. And there was a gentleman in the audience, a husband of one of the women. They were there together. And he said, what about that John character? I said, yes. He said, I don't know. He's sort of like the missing Beatle. And I thought,
it's like, where's his backstory?
Yeah, he really got it.
He really did.
And I thought, I'm going to send him those missing chapters.
Yeah.
Because he deserves them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think I will follow through.
Which is why some of these characters get spin-off novels, right?
I think so. And you also feel like they have more story, absolutely more story to tell. There's something more there.
And in the end, when you're writing historical fiction too, and I'm sure you found this, you can't, as fascinated as you might be about the history of everything, you don't want it to be a snooze fest for your readers. You got to keep the pace moving, right? And so it's a nice balance. And so that's where some of our readers and writing groups come in handy, where they're like, cut the fat, from the historical scenes.
Well, speaking of our writing groups, I wanted to ask you, who is your writing community?
I have a group of about 6 beta readers who get my first drafts, and they tell me if I'm headed in the right direction. They'll give me line by line feedback if I ask for it, which is great. And also mind numbing at times, because you see how much work you have to do, but it's so absolutely critical. So I have that. And then I have an editor I work with who helps me develop things. If I'm not sure where I'm going, she'll help me with it. So that's helpful. And you've had quite a few communities you're involved in.
Well, over the years I have. I mean, my main community has really been my fellow students at a writing school that I go to. And I think their comments, both positive and negative, done in a very nice way. I really learned how to do constructive criticism at this
It's really
school.
Important.
It's very important to learn how to say something, just like in parenting. You say something positive, when your child has spilled milk all over, how artistic of you. It's wonderful.
I love the color.
And it's terrific. The rug never looks so good. And now we're going to learn how to clean that up, right? So they were really instrumental in giving feedback. And so I have that writing school classroom. And then I have a group of writers that I became friendly with during COVID. They're a local group in New Jersey, and I met them one time in person at a local cafe, and the next week
you're on Zoom.
So for a year and a half, I only saw them on Zoom every Tuesday and Thursday morning, and we would review each other's work and comment and talk about what we were going through and working on, and that was terrific and very supportive. And I think most of the writers that I know have a similar community. They don't do it alone. It is a solitary experience in a certain way.
It is. But
in another way, it's really not.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is book clubs, like you mentioned, because you've done, and I do book clubs on Zoom. Like you can, if you ever have a book club, you want to do one of my books, I'm happy to Zoom in.
Me too.
If I'm in the neighborhood, I'll stop by. It's really fun. I got wine selections on there. And yes, Bouchaine is on there.
I don't have that, but I'll think about that for the next.
but now I'm going to add ghee. Yep, I am. But I've had your wine here. And then I think it's really, I learn a lot from my readers, which inform the, like from the first book, it informed the other two novels, what, like the characters they loved, the characters they wanted to see more of, the characters they could do without, that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting. So it's fun.
Okay, so let's move on to our last topic, and that is what is next. And you just talked a little bit about that, but what is next for the Vintner's series, Vintner's Daughters series?
So the Vintner's Daughters series, there's 3 novels. We go from 1895 up through 1918. We end in 1918. And I did leave it, I couldn't resist. I left it open at the end for them to start a bootlegging operation. I couldn't resist. So I'm thinking about that, and because gosh, that's fun, right? That's fun. So, and then I'm thinking, and then I have a women's contemporary novel I'm working on. And I really would love to write the screenplay, which I've never done before. If you know anyone who writes screenplays, I would love that information. But I'm thinking of writing the screenplay for the trilogy and seeing what I can do with it.
It's such a, they're such visual pieces.
As are yours, yeah. The Convention of Lives.
I think it is, but
No,
yours
very
in
much so.
particular, you can see it unspooling before.
It's kind of a movie in my head, the whole
Yeah.
thing, which is, I'm glad you felt that way.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
good.
So I hope
It feels good to hear that.
Find that
I do
screenplay
too.
writer and the option to do that, and
We're working on it.
then we'll all be there in the theater at some point with popcorn.
I hope so. Or on your couch, on your
these
sofa.
days,
Yeah,
right, that's
exactly.
right.
I
That's
know.
right, Netflix, here we come.
And you have another novel you're working
So
on
I
now,
have
right?
a second novel called Mahjong at Mara's,
That's
which
fun.
is
I
strictly
like that
a
title.
contemporary novel,
Yeah.
something different. And but also the coming together of different people and what it means, good and bad, and this, the struggles within that. And I have actually just started a third
Oh,
that is a historical novel that involves this area a little bit, San Francisco.
Fun.
Coming up here. Yes, it's under development. Shelley and I, back to the Napa Historical Society, had a very interesting conversation today
awesome.
about Napa Valley, and I'm going to take some of that information.
There's so much rich history. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just
it's
like
endless,
you're always turning up
endless.
something new.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
I'm,
great.
I'm really excited about that. So that's where we get our material. So with that, I don't know where Shelley is at this point.
Oh, she's right there.
Oh, right
I
over
look,
here.
everyone points. There
So-
she is.
Shelley
So-
said your book's gonna be called Black Bear Diner.
You know what?
I don't
It should
know.
be,
It's
right?
possible. It's Black Bear. It's possible. But Kristen, thank you so much.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
been
And thank you,
fabulous.
everyone. This was
Yeah,
really,
thanks
really
for
fun.
having us. It's been terrific.
Really fun.